Alright, gentlemen, welcome. I'm going to be discussing mental cases today. I'll read the poem, provide some points that you need to know, and then we'll get to the annotation. So, who are these? Why sit they here in twilight? Wherefore rock they, purgatorial shadows, drooping tongues from jaws that slob their relish, baring teeth that leer like skulls' tongues wicked? Stroke on stroke of pain, but what slow panic gorge these chasms round their fretted sockets? Ever from their hair and through their hand palms misery swelters. Surely we have perished, sleeping and walk hell, but who, these hellish? These are men whose minds the dead have ravished. Memory fingers in the hair of murders, multitudinous murders they once witnessed. Wading sloughs of flesh these helpless wander, treading blood from lungs that had loved laughter. Always they must see these things and hear them, batter of guns and shatter of flying muscles, carnage incomparable and human squander, rugged too thick for these men's extrication. Therefore still their eyeballs shrink tormented back into their brains, because on their sense sunlight seems a blood smear. Night comes blood black. Dawn breaks open like a wound that bleeds afresh. Thus their heads wear this hilarious, hideous, awful falseness of set smiling corpses. Thus their hands are plucking at each other, picking at the rope knots of their scourging, snatching after us who smote them, brother, pouring us who dealt them war and madness. So the first thing I want to point out is after hellish here, it is a new stanza. So please make that change in your copy. I don't know what happened. Somehow you got the wrong copies. But yeah, hellish. After that is one stanza. There are 3 stanzas in this poem, not 2. So the poem shows the lasting effects that war has had on a specific group of individuals, those that are specifically in a mental institution. Owen himself experienced shell shock and battle fatigue, which is the same thing that the soldiers here are suffering from. The first stanza looks at the individuals themselves and provides a description of them. The second stanza gives an explanation for how they got to where they are. The third and final stanza again describes the people, and it points blame. The themes included in this poem are the horrors of war, the lasting effects of war, and war having no glory. So the poem opens with 2 rhetorical questions, and they're about the returned soldiers. Now, we think of returned soldiers, we think of a glorious welcome. They're happy there. They've done their duty, but that's not what we see here. They're sitting in twilight. They don't seem to be in control of their own mind. We've got wherefore, which is the use of archaic language, which links in with these biblical allusions that we're familiar with Owen making. Okay, which is again part of purgatorial shadows. It shows that the men are stuck. They could either be stuck between life and death, or reality and war. Okay. I've got this animal imagery here. Their drooping tongues from jaws that slob their relish, baring teeth. Alright, something that bears teeth is like a wolf or a bear. It's not a human thing. These humans are presented as less than humans. These returned soldiers, really. They've got the use of the simile. That marking's a bit off, but the simile is obviously like skulls, tongues, wicked. It shows that the men are the living dead. This idea of men of the living dead is an extended metaphor that works throughout the poem, and we will see it specifically in the last stanza. Stroke on stroke is repetition, obviously. Again, the marking's a bit off, but don't worry about that. It highlights their suffering. We've got this idea of slow panic, which is of course an oxymoron. It shows the poor mental health of the individuals. We've also got this metaphor here of gorge these chasms around their fretted sockets, which shows that no matter what's going on in these guys' life, they're always going to be suffering the effects of this war. Next slide now, we have misery swelters. So ever from their hair and through their hand palms, misery swelters, which is of course an example of personification. We can swelter as humans, misery cannot. It highlights that these men have been affected by war. The men themselves, again, this idea of they are dead, think that what they're in is not reality, that this is war, this suffering that they're experiencing, which is shown through the metaphor walk hell, this suffering is not reality, that they've done their time in the bad area, they've seen the carnage of war, this can't be their life now. So now we are moving on to the next stanza. We're also asked a question here that is immediately answered. But who these hellish? They are of course men whose minds the dead have ravished. We've got dead here is capitalized to show their importance, okay, for the soldiers in terms of they're always on their mind, and again the idea that they're the cause of the suffering. That's why dead is capitalized and personified here. Alright, dead can't ravish people. We can ravish, but the dead can't, so that's why it's called personification. Memory is personified in this. The fact that their memory is finger, doing that shows that their mind has deteriorated to a state where they don't have any control of their memories, and the memories just do whatever they want. We have this example of alliteration here, which heightens the evil in the text and adds to the oral nature of the poem. The choice of adjective here, again, an idea I just spoke about, is the lack of control that the men have over themselves and over their state of mind. So treading blood from lungs that had laughed laughter is an example of a technique we might not have heard before, synecdoche. It uses part of something to refer to the whole. So the lungs represent the whole people, and the line itself is saying that these people had loved life before the war, and now they're in this suffering state where they see blood, they feel the blood of the people that they were involved in killing. So this idea that the next section we're looking at opens with always is an adjective, and it shows that these things are always going to affect them. It's everlasting, the effects on these people. Batter and shadow work is two things here. It's onomatopoeia and it's an example of rhyme. So it creates that oral nature again for the poem, and it gives us a picture instead of in our eyes, using our minds. It gives us a picture through our ears. Okay, it gives us these sounds these men might have been hearing: the batter of guns and shatter of flying muscles. That's not exactly a positive image, but it's an image nonetheless. We've got emotive language of carnage incomparable and human squander, which is Owen starting to develop empathy for the soldiers that have returned. Okay. The next line, I just thought we might need some little explanation of what this actually means, is the men are never free from the horror of war. Okay. So extrication is getting free of something. These men are never free from war, despite the fact they have returned and are no longer serving. So this idea of the third stanza as a whole, the focus is back on the men themselves. Okay, it's no longer on what caused it, it's on the men themselves, and describes their days pretty much. So we've got blood black and blood smear. So blood imagery. So sunlight seems a blood smear, night comes blood black. So they're compound words, and it shows that they're always thinking of this war. It's always there, and everything in their life relates back to it. Now, unfortunately, due to the annotations, you can't see it. That actually says dawn breaks open like a wound that bleeds afresh. Shows that every day a new pain comes through. It's always there for these individuals. It's a simile that's used, and it's also connotations. It's using the connotations and flipping them on their head, really. when we think of dawn and when we think of dawn's role in literature, it's normally to do with rebirth or rejuvenation. It's the exact opposite for these guys. Every day the sun comes up, they are suffering just as much as the days that had previously gone. In the next line we have an example of alliteration and oxymoron. Okay, it shows the madness of the men and the expression on their faces, hilarious and hideous at the same time, humour and horror mixed. So set smiling corpses finishes up the extended metaphor that I spoke about earlier of the soldiers being dead or the soldiers as corpses. The final few lines shows the tone changing. It can be described as sermonistic. So the responder is asking to consider the fates of the men and their role in putting them there in this institution. Okay, so what, not so much us, but what did other people at the time do? It's all out. The fault is not within these men for their condition. The fault is within others. He does this through using inclusive language. Okay, us, brother, to show that everyone's responsible. So in this poem, Owen has presented us with men who have suffered as a result of the war, and it shows the reality for what life is like after. He also shows us glimpses into what war was like through that second stanza there, and like he's done with a couple of the other poems, the real punch of the poem, the real impact of the poem, for me at least, is those last couple of lines where the focus isn't so much on the men, but on other people, us even. So there's some things to think about. Think about techniques that I may have missed. Have a look at the questions. Think about things you want us to talk about with this poem. And I'll see you in class next time. Thanks, guys.